want to talk about something that hits deep for so many of us. You reach out, you show up, you try again and again, and then silence. You're left with unanswered messages, cold shoulders, and a growing weight in your chest. And in that moment, you start to wonder, what did I do wrong? Why am I not enough? But here's the truth. Your worth is not up for negotiation. Chasing someone who is actively choosing to ignore you is like running on a treadmill expecting to reach the ocean. It doesn't take you anywhere except exhaustion. We are wired for connection. Every bit of research tells us this. But connection is not meant to be forced. It's not meant to be begged for, bargained for, or manipulated into existence. The people who truly belong in your life will never make you feel like an outsider in your own story. Now, I get it. Walking away is painful. It triggers something primal in us. Rejection feels like a direct hit to our sense of belonging, but ignoring is a choice. And when someone makes the choice to ignore you, you have a choice too. We often think of communication as what's said, words spoken, messages sent, calls made. But the truth is, what isn't said, what's withheld, what's ignored, often holds more weight than any neatly crafted sentence ever could. Silence has its own language. And when someone you care about chooses silence over honesty, over effort, over connection, it speaks volumes. You don't need a formal announcement or a blunt confrontation to know when someone is pulling away. You can feel it. The shift in energy, the missed calls, the text left unread, not once but consistently. This kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It's a decision. That's the hardest part, the decision, because silence forces you to face a truth you weren't ready to hear, that someone may no longer value your presence, your voice, or your effort. And when you care deeply, it's easy to explain that silence away. You tell yourself, they're just busy, or maybe they didn't see my message, or I'm probably just overthinking it. But deep down, your gut knows. It always does. And what happens when we don't listen to that inner voice? We start turning ourselves inside out, bending and breaking to make sense of someone else's silence instead of sitting in our own truth. We are wired for story. In the absence of answers, we create narratives to fill the gaps. So when someone goes quiet, we spin stories. I'm not good enough. I must have done something wrong. I'm too much. I'm not enough. Our brains are hardwired to seek meaning. And when silence leaves us with none, we manufacture our own, usually rooted in shame. This is where it gets dangerous because shame loves silence. Shame thrives in it. The more unanswered we feel, the more our shame gremlins whisper, see, you were never really lovable in the first place. But here's the thing, silence might hurt, but it's not your fault. It's not your burden to decode someone else's lack of response. You are not responsible for someone else's emotional availability or lack thereof. We often conflate being ignored with being unworthy, but they are not the same. Someone's inability or unwillingness to communicate with you is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their capacity or their readiness or their honesty, but it is not your identity. It doesn't define you. Still, silence is confusing. It's passive. It's ambiguous. And it can feel like 1,000 tiny paper cuts instead of one clean wound. At least with words, especially hard, honest ones, you can begin to heal. You have clarity. But silence doesn't offer that gift. It keeps you in limbo, stuck between hope and reality. That ambiguity can paralyze you. You start walking on eggshells, trying to guess their thoughts, decode their mood, earn your way back into their attention. And the worst part, you're the only one dancing. You become the only one doing the emotional labor. In those moments, it's tempting to chase after clarity, to send one more message, to ask one more question, just to break the silence. But here's the hard truth we often resist. If someone wanted to speak to you, they would. If they cared enough to maintain the connection, they would. People make time for what matters. And silence, prolonged, consistent, and unacknowledged, is an answer. It may not be the answer you wanted, but it is the answer you need. So yes, silence speaks. It tells you where you stand. It tells you how much effort they're willing to give. And more importantly, it tells you where your energy shouldn't go. It's not your job to light yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially not someone who won't even strike the match. When they go silent, let that be your signal, not to chase, not to fix, but to listen. Listen to what the silence is saying. It's not rejection, it's redirection. It's not the absence of love, it's the presence of truth. Let's name this for what it really is: the desperate search for validation. We don't always chase people because we love them. Sometimes we chase people because we're trying to prove something to them, yes, but mostly to ourselves. We want to prove that we're worth sticking around for, that we're lovable, that we're important enough to be chosen. Their attention or lack of it becomes the measuring stick we use to gauge our own worth. And the moment we do that, when we tie our value to someone else's ability to see us, we hand over our power. This is dangerous territory because it becomes a cycle. One where your self-esteem rides the emotional roller coaster of someone else's inconsistency. When they reply, you breathe. When they don't, you shrink. You begin to internalize their silence as proof that you're not enough. But here's the truth that cuts through all of it like a blade. Attention is not the same as affection, and someone noticing you doesn't mean they value you. Sometimes people pay attention just long enough to keep you close, but never long enough to make you feel secure. When we depend on external validation to feel whole, we are constantly negotiating our identity. We're only as good as the last compliment, the last text, the last breadcrumb they tossed our way. That's not self-worth, that's self-abandonment. It's a slow erosion of your inner knowing, the part of you that once believed you were inherently worthy, before the world told you otherwise, before you were taught that love had to be earned, chased, or performed for. You are not a product that needs to be marketed. You are not a campaign that needs to be launched. You are not a project that needs approval. You are a human being, flawed, brilliant, growing, and your worth is not up for debate. Not by them, not by anyone, and certainly not by a person who can't even make the time to respond to your presence. We don't talk about this enough, but your energy is sacred. And when you pour it into people who don't recognize its value, you are planting seeds in soil that was never meant to grow anything. This is where shame likes to creep in. It whispers, if they really saw you, they'd stay. If you were smarter, funnier, more attractive, more something, they'd never leave. But shame is a liar, a powerful one. And when we don't confront that lie, we start shrinking to fit into spaces that were never made for our fullness. We dim our light so we don't shine too brightly. We mute our voices so we don't seem too much, all to gain attention from someone who can't even meet us halfway. Let's be honest. It's flattering when someone chooses you. It feels good to be seen. We all crave that. But there's a difference between being chosen and being valued. One is temporary, based on mood, convenience, or need. The other is enduring, built on presence, honesty, and mutual respect. If someone's attention is the only thing anchoring your self-worth, then their absence becomes a storm that unravels you. You deserve better than to be undone by someone else's inconsistency. You deserve better than to question your enoughness every time they withdraw. And maybe that's what this moment is for, not to prove you're worthy of being chased, but to remember you never needed to chase in the first place. The people who see your value don't make you beg for scraps of their attention. They don't make you doubt your place in their lives, and they don't disappear when it's inconvenient to stay. So no, your value is not dependent on who texts you back, who gives you time, or who finally decides you're worth it. Your value is yours. And it doesn't disappear when someone else fails to see it. There's this moment, maybe you've felt it, where you find yourself reaching, calling, texting, checking their social media, rereading conversations, dissecting every word, wondering, What did I miss? What can I do? It starts subtly, a gentle lean toward clarity, but before you know it, you've stepped off solid ground and right into emotional quicksand. Chasing someone who isn't reciprocating pulls you deeper into uncertainty, anxiety, and self-doubt. With every unanswered message, the more you reach, the more unstable you feel. That's not connection. That's emotional survival mode. We don't talk about the cost of chasing enough, not just the time or the energy, but the emotional currency it drains. The self-questioning, the over-explaining, the constant second-guessing of your worth because someone won't or can't give you what you're asking for. Clarity, presence, effort. And here's the trap. The more they pull away, the harder you try. It becomes a loop, one that feels familiar if you've ever equated love with performance. If you grew up feeling like you had to earn love, chasing can feel like home, even when it's wrecking you. In my research on vulnerability and belonging, I've found this truth again and again. When people feel disconnected, they hustle. We perform, we overfunction, we shape-shift. We try to prove that we're worthy of being chosen. And the more we hustle, the further we stray from our authentic selves. Chasing doesn't just exhaust us, it alters us. We become people we don't even recognize, all in the name of trying to be enough for someone who's already shown us they're not fully in. That's what emotional quicksand does. It steals our clarity, our dignity, and our groundedness. And let's be honest, this kind of chasing rarely leads to peace. Even if they respond, even if they come back, it doesn't feel right. It's not anchored, it's unstable. Because you're no longer showing up as your whole self, you're showing up as a version of you molded by fear, rejection, and the desperate hope that if you just do enough, say enough, be enough, they'll finally choose you. But that's not connection. That's coercion of the soul. And it's unsustainable. You cannot build a relationship on a foundation of emotional desperation. The worst part is that the more you chase, the more you lose sight of your own needs. You stop asking, do I even feel safe here? Do I feel respected, heard, appreciated? Because the entire dynamic becomes about getting them to stay, instead of asking if you even want to be in a space where you're constantly unsure of your place. Emotional quicksand clouds your judgment. You start to confuse anxiety with love. You think the high-stakes guessing game is passion, but it's not. It's emotional chaos. Here's something that might be hard to hear. Healthy relationships don't require chasing. When two people are emotionally available, ready, and aligned, connection flows. There's effort, yes, but not desperation. There's vulnerability, but not volatility. There's presence without pressure. When it's real, it won't feel like drowning in uncertainty. It won't feel like you're chasing a ghost. And if you're constantly in pursuit, constantly trying to fix, prove, or persuade someone to care, you're not in a relationship. You're in a transaction, one where the price is your peace. So if you feel like you're sinking, like the more you try, the worse it feels, pay attention. That's not love pulling you in. That's emotional quicksand. And the first step to freeing yourself is no longer reaching for the person pulling away. The next step is reaching inward, asking, what am I afraid will happen if I stop? Because often what we fear isn't losing them, it's being alone with ourselves. But solitude isn't what breaks us. Abandoning ourselves to avoid it is. There's a painful myth we've been sold, especially those of us who are wired for connection, that if we just try harder, love deeper, give more, we can make someone stay. That the right words, the right gestures, the right timing can convince someone to be who we want or need them to be. But love is not a performance. Belonging is not a transaction. And the right people, they don't need to be chased, because real connection doesn't require pursuit. It requires presence, mutuality, intention, not begging, We don't often realize we're chasing because the story in our heads tells us something different. We say, I'm just being patient, or I know they care deep down, or they've just been hurt before. And while compassion is a beautiful thing, it becomes dangerous when we use it to excuse consistent disconnection. There's a line between understanding someone's wounds and sacrificing your emotional safety to carry their healing. The right people don't make you question your place in their lives. They don't weaponize their silence. They don't dangle intimacy like a reward. The relationships that feed your soul, romantic, platonic, familial, are not built on pursuit. They are built on reciprocity. They require two people willing to show up, to listen, to lean in, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. I've said this in my research on vulnerability. You can't get to courage without walking through vulnerability. And the people who are capable of healthy connection are willing to do that work with you. They won't disappear the moment things get real. Here's the thing about chasing. It tricks you into thinking you're the only one who needs to change. You start editing yourself. You become careful. You shrink. You shape your words to avoid scaring them away, to seem more agreeable, more desirable, more whatever you think they want. But in doing so, you slowly lose your own voice. You abandon your authenticity in the hopes that it will buy you affection. And no matter how much they give back, it's never enough because it's not being given to the real you. It's being given to the curated version of you. And that's not belonging. That's performance. What we often miss in the chaos of chasing is the clarity that comes from stillness. When you stop running after someone and simply stand in your own truth, something powerful happens. You begin to notice who's still standing with you, who reaches out, who meets you where you are instead of watching you climb to reach them. The right people see you, not the perfect you, not the Instagram you, not the people-pleasing you, the real you. And they don't flinch. They don't retreat. They don't disappear. One of the most common things I've found in my research is this. People will often say they want love, but they fear the intimacy that comes with being truly seen. And some of the people you're chasing, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the discomfort of being known. They're scared of vulnerability, and instead of leaning in, they bolt. That doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means they're not ready. And chasing someone who's emotionally unavailable doesn't heal your wounds, it deepens them. So ask yourself this, do I feel like I'm being chosen here? Or do I feel like I'm constantly convincing them to care? The difference between those two experiences is night and day. The right people, people who are healthy, emotionally present, self-aware, they won't make you beg for their energy, their time, their honesty. You won't have to fight for a seat at a table you were invited to in the first place. The right people don't require pursuit because they're walking with you, not running ahead, waiting to be caught. There's something deeply human in wanting to be seen, known, and held emotionally. That longing for intimacy is not weakness, it's courage. But what becomes painful is when we try to drag someone into emotional depth they are unwilling or unable to access. We convince ourselves that if we just love harder, explain clearer, show up more beautifully, they'll finally meet us there. We hope our consistency will unlock their vulnerability. But emotional availability isn't something you can ignite in another person. It's not a switch you can flip. It's a door they have to choose to open from the inside. This is where so many of us get stuck, especially those of us who are empathic, who lead with our hearts. We sense potential. We see their tenderness beneath the silence, their softness behind the walls. We think, if I just stay long enough, maybe they'll trust me enough to come forward. But love, rooted in potential, is dangerous. It asks you to commit, not to a person as they are, but to a vision of who they might become. And in that process, you lose track of the truth staring you in the face. They are not emotionally here. It doesn't matter how much you care, how consistent you are, how safe you make yourself. Someone who hasn't done their emotional work cannot meet you in intimacy. You will feel like you're knocking on a door that doesn't open. Not because you're not worthy, but because they're not available. Emotional availability requires self-awareness, accountability, the willingness to feel discomfort, to sit with shame, to own past pain without projecting it forward. And if they haven't done that work, you will always feel like you're loving in the dark. Trying to force emotional connection with someone who avoids vulnerability is like trying to pour water into a closed jar. No matter how generous or intentional you are, nothing truly lands. It bounces off or spills over or disappears. And then you're left feeling empty, confused, and even ashamed. You start to wonder, am I asking for too much? Am I too intense, too emotional, too honest? But you're not. You're asking for basic emotional presence. And there is nothing unreasonable about that. In my research, I've found that emotional unavailability often masks deep-rooted fear. Fear of being seen, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. But no amount of your love can fix someone's fear if they're unwilling to confront it. You can hold space, yes. You can be kind, but you cannot be the scaffolding for someone else's emotional growth. That's their work. And the moment you start doing it for them, you step out of your own lane. You stop tending to your own needs because you're so busy trying to prove to them that they're safe. And here's what's even harder. Sometimes we stay because we believe walking away makes us disloyal or unloving. But there is nothing loving about abandoning yourself for someone who won't show up. Love without reciprocity becomes sacrifice. And sacrifice over time turns into resentment. You deserve to be in a relationship where emotional availability is not a goal you're striving toward, but a shared space you both inhabit. One where you're not begging to be heard, but simply heard. Not pleading to be understood, but naturally understood. So no, you can't force someone to be emotionally available. You can invite, you can model, but you can't drag someone into the deep end if they're still afraid of the water. And you shouldn't have to. The people who are ready won't need convincing. They won't ghost you when it gets hard. They won't punish your vulnerability. They'll meet you in the mess, in the honesty, in the sacred and sometimes awkward space where real connection lives. Not because you forced it, but because they chose to show up too. Silence. It's heavy, isn't it? It lingers. It echoes louder than some of the harshest words. We often think silence means nothing, like it's a placeholder, a pause, a gap to be filled. But here's the truth we need to wrestle with. Silence is a message. It's a response. And sometimes it's the clearest one we'll ever get. When someone doesn't respond, doesn't show up, doesn't reach back out, they're speaking. We just don't always want to hear what they're saying. And I get it. We're meaning-making creatures. We want closure. We crave understanding. When someone ghosts or withdraws or fades, we scramble to fill in the blanks. We create narratives to protect our hearts. Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe they didn't see the message. Maybe they'll come around. But at some point, we have to stop waiting for noise and start listening to the quiet. Because silence, especially repeated silence, is clarity. And clarity is a kindness, even when it hurts. In my research, I've found over and over that people are far more afraid of ambiguity than they are of pain. Not knowing leaves us suspended, anxious, and deeply insecure. And that insecurity often drives us to chase, to re-engage, to reach out again, to soften our ask, to water ourselves down in the hopes that if we just tweak something, they'll finally respond. What if instead of fighting it, we honored it as a boundary, even if it's one we didn't want? This is where our emotional maturity is tested, because silence, especially when it comes from someone we care about, can trigger our deepest fears of abandonment, rejection, invisibility. It tells us, you're not worth a reply. But we have to be careful not to internalize someone else's avoidance as evidence of our unworthiness. Their silence may have everything to do with them, their discomfort, their immaturity, their emotional unavailability. But when we make it about us, we carry a weight that was never ours to begin with. Let's name what silence really does. It creates space, and we get to choose what we do in that space. We can fill it with chasing, explaining, doubting, spiraling, or we can fill it with something that heals, reflection, boundaries, clarity, truth. Sometimes silence gives us the very pause we needed to step back and ask, is this relationship mutual? Is this space honoring me? It may not be the response we wanted, but it often holds the wisdom we needed. It's also worth saying this: people don't always owe us closure in the form of conversation. That's a hard truth, and one that stings. But the fantasy that we're entitled to a final talk, a proper goodbye, a neat ending, that fantasy keeps us stuck. It keeps us tethered to someone else's emotional capacity instead of trusting our own. When someone chooses silence, they are also choosing not to co-create clarity. That choice speaks volumes, and we have to let it speak without interrupting it with hope or excuses. So the next time someone goes quiet, ask yourself, what is their silence teaching me about what I'm tolerating? Because when you stop trying to translate silence into noise, you start to hear your own voice more clearly. You start to listen to your intuition, your patterns, your pain, and your power. Silence, when we stop fearing it, becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, we often find the truth we've been too afraid to say out loud. This isn't enough for me. And that, my friend, is where healing begins. So here's what I want to leave you with. You are not hard to love. You are not too much. You are not too emotional, too intense, too needy, or too complicated. You are a human being wired for connection, worthy of relationships that are mutual, safe, and whole. And when someone shows you with their silence, their absence, their avoidance, that they are not willing or able to meet you there, you don't have to chase. You get to choose you. This isn't about arrogance. It's about self-respect. It's about no longer auditioning for roles you were never meant to play in someone else's story. It's about walking away, not because you're giving up, but because you're finally choosing peace over performance, truth over tension, and depth over desperation. Let their distance teach you what presence really means. Let their silence remind you how deeply you deserve to be heard. And let your own healing speak louder than any apology that never came. Because the moment you stop chasing people who ignore you, you start coming home to yourself. And there is no safer place to be.